Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very accomplished and respected professional who was earlier a medical doctor, now a big name in the world of art, from Goa, India, Dr. Subodh Kerkar. Dr. Kerkar, welcome to the show.
A pleasure.
Subodh is an artist and founder director of the Museum of Goa. He's a qualified medical professional who gave up medicine to pursue arts, and given all the work he's done, he's understandably been recognized, felicitated, and awarded several times. So Subodh, before we talk about the Museum of Goa, tell me about your own amazing journey and what motivated you to give up a career in medicine and pursue your passion.
Yeah, well, I came from a rather poor family. My father was a school teacher. And, I was a good student. So I stood seventh in the board. And so I could get admission anywhere. And during that time, in 76 or so, the options, people who had big scores in 12th standard exams was going to medicine first, or engineering, and that was a trend. And at the age of 18, I wanted to become almost everybody. Apart from becoming a mafia don or becoming a shopkeeper or a priest or a soldier, there was hardly anything which I didn't want to become.
Yeah.
And I became a doctor. But then after some time, I realized that it is rather routine. And it was treating cough, cold, typhoid, malaria. All my life was not really what I wanted. And to put it a little in a lighter vein, 60-70% of my patients were British tourists because tourism had boomed in Goa.
Right.
And the idea of spending my lifetime in the service of British loose motions was not palatable. And I thought India has taken enough shit from the British for 150 years, and I didn't want to take any more.
Well said. Well said.
Well, I basically believe that the only purpose of life is to be happy. There's no other purpose. And by doing what I'm doing today, I can tell you that I'm an extremely happy man. And I think I'm very happy that I gave up my medical profession.
Amazing, amazing. So now let's talk about the Museum of Goa. How would you define your vision and mission of MOG?
Okay. So when I started practicing as an artist, it took me many years to get recognition, forget getting recognition, to understand art. Because, I knew realistic paintings very well when I gave up my medicine because my father was an artist and we learned realistic painting. But then after some time, I realized that this is not art. Because skill does not make you an artist. Like if you know grammar very well, you don't become a writer. You need to have something to say.
Yeah.
So understanding art took me almost 15 years. And then I realized that in a country of 1.3 billion people, not more than about 2 lakhs people connect with contemporary art. Others have no idea. And I'm not talking about laborers and farmers. I'm talking corporate heads, architects, doctors. They have no idea because the world of contemporary art is sort of close to most people.
Correct.
And most people feel that this is only for the richy rich, not for us. And I thought that I'm not going to spend my lifetime creating art only for 1 or 2 lakhs people. I have to reach the masses. And I also realized that it is important that everybody appreciates contemporary art. So in order to democratize contemporary art, I started Museum of Goa, putting in my own money.
Wow.
And everybody thought that I was a fool. Because I did it at an industrial estate, and they thought 5 log nahi aayenge. Not 5 people will visit every day. And I had put in 4 crores. And they told me that just take your money and live happily ever after. But then today I can tell you that there are about 200 to 500 people visiting Museum of Goa every day.
Incredible.
And I am not just, I'm not living happily ever after. I am living happier ever after.
Amazing, amazing. And, given the fact that you just mentioned you put 4 crores of your own money, what challenges did you face in curating and maintaining a privately owned art space of this magnitude?
Well, initially, nobody believed in me. So that is the biggest challenge. Some of my closest friends who were in a good position told me, Subodh, you're a fool. It's nonsense. It will not work. But then, apart from being an artist, I'm an avid reader. And especially avid reader of history. And I stumbled upon this idea that why not narrate history using contemporary art? And that is the structure of Museum of Goa. Go to any museum of history, anywhere in the world, you will see old artifacts, you will see texts. And it is through these old artifacts, sculptures, texts, that history is narrated. I have discovered, I would claim, a new way of narrating history using only contemporary art. And also, one of the most important thing is my curatorial language can be described as Tukaram language or Kabir language, because I make it so simple that everybody should connect with it. Because many times when you go to biennales of the world, whether Venice Biennale or Basel Art Fair or any of these big events, half of the things most people don't understand. Even I did not understand when I went for the first time. So I kept that aside. I'm not saying that is not good art. That is good art. But very consciously, I was aware of my audience. And I decided I will only show what is palatable to everybody. And that does not mean it is low quality art. Tukaram's Abhango Kabir's poetry is not of any lower standards.
Absolutely.
Complex poetry.
Absolutely.
So that's the language. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, please go ahead.
Huh?
Please go ahead. You're saying something?
Yeah. So basically, I initially had planned to create work myself in response to history. And I worked so much that I could fill in a museum. Then slowly, I started organizing meetings of other artists. And many of these artists offered their work to me because my museum is a hybrid of a museum and a gallery. And after all these words, museum, galleries are coined. They have attached meanings. So my museum is a museum because it's very large. It has large spaces and we welcome school picnics there. So I'm not an art dealer. I'm an art promoter.
Absolutely. But I love this concept that you just told me about narrating history using art. Can you give me an example for my viewers and listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, it would have been much nicer if we had some visuals, because describing a visual with orally is a task. But let me tell you, there's one work where I have a boat. And in this boat, there are platforms created which rock like this with a motor. I work with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. So they rock. And on this, I have kept hundreds of gods. And so in this is a real boat from Goa, a fishing canoe. And these boats, the gods rock like this. Now, the story is when the Portuguese arrived in 1510, they conquered Goa. Their objective was very clear. Unlike the British, they wanted to convert people to Christianity. And of course, they wanted to control the pepper trade, the spice trade.
Yeah.
And they started demolishing temples and kept a record of every demolition. And they wanted to sort of cure the Indians of their religion they thought was bad because they noticed sati. It was absolutely horrible. So by the way, Alfonso the Albuquerque was the first one to ban sati. Raja Ram Mohan Roy came much later.
Yeah.
So sati was banned in Goa first. So anyway, so they started building churches. And then the Hindus, they took their gods to the two rivers, Mandavi and Zuari, to a place called Kumbharzua, which is in Ponda. And Ponda was not under the Portuguese rule. And so new temples, small temples were built there. And so even today, when the festivities of the temples happen in Ponda, and actually almost 99% of the temples in Goa are in Ponda, old temples. And so the first honor to carry the palanquin of God goes to the boatmen of a village called Adpai. That's because their ancestors had saved gods. So in the Bible, there is a story of Noah's Ark where God intervenes to save mankind. Here, men intervene to save gods. So this is Goa's Ark. So this is the work. But at the same time, I add a footnote here. Otherwise, people feel that I'm one of these religious fanatics. No, I'm not. And so I add a footnote. History should be understood, but this should not result in any kind of, ill feelings towards the present-day Christian or the present-day Portuguese. That's
very well said. Very well said. And the context is very, very important in history.
This is, there are many, hundreds of works in this.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure. But moving on, Subodh, you spoke about contemporary art. How do you think the Museum of Goa has contributed to contemporary art in India?
Yeah, well, it's a small contribution, but definitely there is nothing like this in the country. Of course, we have Kiran Nadar's museum. She's starting one that's very big. What is most unique about my museum is it is democratic. So nobody feels threatened to come here. And we have done so much of branding. So all over signages. So 200 to 500 people land up here. And most of these people who come here, this is their first visit to any contemporary art space.
Wow.
Because most contemporary art spaces like galleries are not interested in school students or people who won't buy.
Yeah.
But I'm interested in everybody. So for me, it is democratic. Democratizing art is very important. And so 90% of the people are their first visit. But what is most interesting is they love it. And so if you see our donation box, people even donate, simple people. And so that's something which I definitely, of course, it's not a huge thing, but I wish I could start a museum of this kind in every state with the history of that state. And that's my objective.
So one question I should have asked you a little earlier, how do you define contemporary art?
Well, that's very simple. Art of today is contemporary. Contemporary is not a word which is a complex word. Samakalin kala. Anything which is happening now. Now does not mean exactly today. It can be in the last, 100 years.
Okay. So 100 odd years you would define as contemporary.
Yeah, with our more or less a lifetime. Or maybe 2 lifetimes. That's fine.
Okay.
It's not a rigid word.
I understand. But then tell me, do you see a relation between traditional Indian art and contemporary Indian art? And how does the Museum of Goa bridge this gap?
So it's like this. There are in the Republic of Art, there are no dualities. That is what art actually teaches you.
Right.
There is no duality of the rich and the poor, high caste, low caste, contemporary and traditional. These terms like, for example, primitive art. If you see so-called primitive art, it is as complex and as evolved as any art. Like Picasso drew his inspiration from primitive art. Actually, the history of art, the authors of the history of art, has done great injustice to the traditional arts by just brushing them aside as so-called traditional or primitive. There's nothing primitive about it. I mean, most arts, especially in India, if you see Shola sculptures, they're very evolved. They are actually most modern sculptures of all times. Basically, if you see, they're stylized, they're not realistic. So I don't make a difference. And art actually does not make a difference. In the, as I said, Republic of Art, there is no dualities. Everything is good.
Very well said. And Subodh, how do you select what artworks and which artists you want to feature in the museum?
Yeah, see, I have my limited budget because this is I'm not a big corporate guy. I'm an artist, and the museum is built with the money which I earn from art and businesses. And so now, of course, I want to collaborate. That I will tell you later. But how do I select is, first of all, a lot of artists from Goa. Because I'm a student of history, I organize meetings with the artists and I talk to them about history. And then they get inspired to do something connected with Goa. I mean, history does not mean that they have to do something inspired by something which happened 200 years ago. They can do something what happened last morning. So basically, a Goa experience. Art is an expression of time.
Correct.
And so any expression which is valid and which is a sincere expression is a good expression. So that's what I do. I mean, any work which I feel is connected with Goa is invited. Any aspect of Goa life.
And yet, you mentioned that you're part gallery and part museum. How do you balance being a commercial space and an educational institution, if I can use the term?
Yeah. So one simple thing we do is I will not allow anything in the museum which I feel is of not a certain standard which we expect.
Right.
So because just because something sells doesn't mean it is good. I myself, when I started my artistic career, I sold something which I could describe as scrap. What I created, a lot of people bought. And I thought I was an artist, but luckily I understood that this is not art soon enough. And so I started exploring, learning. So many people say I'm selling. So selling is not a criteria of good art or bad art. So I would only choose what I would say is good art. And I'm lucky to have a lot of advisors. And so that's what we do.
Very interesting. You also mentioning that you're now bringing in maybe some partnerships or sponsorships to be able to grow the Museum of Goa. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, actually, the Museum of Goa is technically a small-scale industry because we are in an industrial estate. But now I'm doing my next museum.
Wow.
And the next museum is actually in partnership with somebody who is very good in hospitality. It's a beer museum. And let me tell you that beer history and beer culture is as fascinating as any other history. And I have been studying beer history. And this will be a museum of contemporary art, narrating or in response to beer history. But in addition to the museum, which will be about 2,000 square meters, we will have restaurants and bars, and it will have 365 days of beer festival, all day, all year. And this is in partnership with some people who know how to handle the bars, restaurants. And we will have begin with 4 restaurants. And this will going to start within 6-7 months.
Wow.
Yeah, but after that is more interesting. I have decided, I'm 64 now, and I have decided I will stop doing anything which could be described as a business activity. I want to devote the rest of my life for creating museums, but on behalf of foundations. Either my own foundation or anybody's foundation who, for example, one could do a museum of Gurgaon. Gurgaon also has interesting history.
Yeah.
Every place is oozing with history. And my specialization is to narrate it using contemporary art. And not just with my own art, but encouraging other artists to create works. So I would like to make a museum of Gujarat, museum of Andhra, museum of Karnataka. And then my dream project is to create an Indian Ocean Museum.
Amazing. Amazing. More power to you, sir. So my next question is that, given the amount of technology that has now come into the world, how do you think the digital age and the rise of social media is impacting the Museum of Goa and your vision of developing museums in every possible city?
I think I'm very technology friendly. Actually, I must be the oldest Instagrammer. I learned it from my son, who is a very important, social media influencer, an artist, is essentially an artist. I learned it from him. And every post I create gets at least about 10,000 views within about 4-5 hours.
Wow.
And some of the posts get about 7 million views. So we have had many posts with that kind of viewership. And so social media is actually helped in a big way because there is no gallery in the world which can sort of show your work to 7 million people or 10,000 people for that matter within just a few hours.
Yeah.
And so social media, I'm using it very effectively. And thanks to, again, my son, Subodh Kerkar. And so it has helped, and it's and technology-wise, though in spite of my age, I'm very close to technology. I'm working with an electronic engineer and a mechanical engineer, and we have a lot of work in the museum which uses technology. So I'm very technology friendly, but at the same time, but I also believe that AI is not going to change this. The art world. AI is good to write some letters or doing something, but the foundation of any creative activity is intuition. And AI will never have intuition. Because when Einstein got E is equal to mc square, he himself admits that it's basically the intuition which is most important.
Correct. Correct. Great response. So time for 2 or 3 more questions. My next question is that you briefly shared with me what you envision as the future, multiple museums, including a museum for the Indian Ocean. But how do you envision these small museums becoming a force to reckon with in the contemporary art scene?
If one artist who is not really extremely with unlimited funds, with limited funds. So I had only 4 crores and that was the only money I had. I had no other money and I create a museum. And if I can do it, I think a few people coming together, people like you, you have something to contribute back to the society. And I have already a track record of creating one museum. Now I'm doing the second museum. And people are convinced that this man can deliver. I think we can always come together and create a museum, for example, of Gurgaon, Museum of Delhi. Basically, we have a lot of scholars who will feed us with history. And then my job is to translate history into art with my own works and works of other artists. So it is easily possible. And it's not something which is, because we are not going to, art market is a different thing. When you see you're buying a work of art for some crores, that is moving within that art market. It is one rich man buying from the another rich man, a woman. So leave the art market aside. When kind of an activity which I am doing, I think it's easily possible. Lots of artists will love to contribute. Of course, they must pay something. It's not free the way that we take it from them, but not those kind of sums. Yeah.
Well said. Two more questions now. Can you share any memorable anecdote or experience related to Museum of Goa that left a deep impact on you?
Yeah, actually, there are many, but let me just share one. There were one day about 10 farmers who visited the Museum of Goa. They came from Sindhudurga. Sindhudurga is just in Maharashtra, not a few hours drive from here. And when I looked at them, I knew that they're simple people, they're farmers. So I asked them, and I know Marathi. So I asked them, you came to the museum, who advised you to come here? They said, we have specially come. And they said one of their colleagues, who is also a farmer, he had come to the museum. He got so much floored by this museum. A simple man, not even very educated in the term of degrees, but a farmer, loved my museum so much. He went and told the colleagues there that please go to Goa, don't go to the seashore. Because unka seashore and hamara seashore ek hi hai. Go to Museum of, and they came and they were extremely happy. And that is, I think, what is the receipt of my whatever I have struggled for.
Oh, wonderful.
Every child comes and gives me 10 stars, I normally ask a child who visits, I mean, out of 10, how many stars will you give me? And the child says 10,000. That's the moment of, oh my God, so I have touched them. The museum is
amazing. And my last question is about, and this is for the many people who will listen to us. Based on your own amazing journey, what message or advice would you give to young adults, young artists, curators, or anyone wanting to contribute to the world of art?
Yeah, I think the only thing is you have to be sincere. And you have to basically, art is a function of intellect. You might be very good in skill, but you don't create art out of skill. Skill is required, but unless you are aware, unless you read, aware of politics, about social customs, about, when there is a war happening, you can't sit in your studio and paint flowers.
Yeah.
You have to respond to war. That's the function of an artist. An artist is a receptor, a sensor and transmitter of ideas in a society. And you have to perform that role. And you have to be political and you have to be sincere. And well, if there is any question, I would answer. Otherwise, I would like to end with a small poem.
Please tell me. Yeah, please.
So, okay, many of my works which I do, are of temporary nature. Because I plant shells on the seaside. Of course, there are many things which I do of permanent nature. And there's a poem of Tagore. The poem goes something like this: when death knocks on my door and says your time has come, I shall tell death I never lived in time. I lived in love. And when death asks me, will your sculptures be remembered forever? I shall tell death I do not know, but when I created them, I felt eternity.
How amazing. How amazing. And what wonderful words to end with. And Subodh, your last piece of advice to young artists, be sincere. Your wonderful words from Rabindranath Tagore. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your journey. Thank you for speaking to me about the Museum of Goa. I learned many new things, including what goes behind the mind of an artist when they create. And thank you also for everything that you are doing for contemporary art and art in our country. Thank you for speaking to me and good luck.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It was lovely speaking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.